Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, and I believe that all readers should read children's literature, especially adults. So that's what we do on the KidLit Love podcast. We celebrate all things children's literature picture books, early readers, middle grade, and young adult novels, too. Whether you're an adult reading to your inner child or connecting the young readers in your lives with fantastic books, you've come to the right place. Each week, we'll talk to a different children's literature author and discuss their books, their hopes and dreams for readers, their writing process, and much, much more. So grab a notebook to build your TBR and let's get to today's episode of Kid Lit Love. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the KidLit Love podcast. I'm Stephanie Affinito, your KidLit loving host, inviting you back to another bookish conversation with a children's literature author and illustrator. Today, I'm talking with Michele Assarasakorn and Nathan Fairbairn. Michele and Nathan are the illustrator-author team behind the PAWS series, a collection of middle grade graphic novels that follows four best friends who run their very own dog walking business. They're here today to talk about their fourth book in the series, Hazel Has Her Hands Full. In this book, Hazel secretly takes on her first solo PAWS job in an effort to prove to her overprotective mother that despite her wheelchair, she is just as capable as her friends. I loved it. I loved the story. I love the messages, and I can't wait to talk about it today. So let's get right to the episode. Michele, Nathan, welcome to KidLit Love. I'm so glad you are both here today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. There's some sort of special magic and energy when both of you are on the call. And so it's exciting. I love days like this. And I would love to start with your backstories, a bit of who both of you are. You have, the comic world in common. This series was some sort of a debut for each of you in some respects. Yet you have differences in coming to children's literature that I would love to know about. So I don't know if you have a preference of who wants to begin, but I would love to hear the stories of how we got to the PAWS series.
Nathan, I'll let you go first.
Okay. Thanks, Michele. Yeah, so I guess I'll start with who I am. I got my first job in comics in around 2006. I was working for Marvel Comics. I worked on a miniseries called Star-Lord, which was well received enough that we folded it into an ongoing series afterwards called Guardians of the Galaxy. So I worked on Star-Lord and Guardians of the Galaxy, and then moved on to all kinds of other things for Marvel, like X-Men and Spider-Man and Wolverine and characters like that. And then I jumped ship over to DC, and I worked on Batman and Wonder Woman and Swamp Thing. And then I did some Image comics. I worked on Invincible, which is a TV series now, and then I did colored the Scott Pilgrim series, which was a big deal. And that was great. I spent 15 years of my career working, making comics, but all those comics were aimed at adult audiences. And I had this moment where a book that I had written called Lake of Fire, which was like a historical fiction, science fiction mashup. I was really proud of it, but it was completely inappropriate for my own children. And I kind of had this moment where I looked back at my career, and at that point, I had worked on I think like 8,000 pages of comics in my career, and there wasn't one of them that I felt like I could share with my daughter, which really bothered me because she loved comics. She was really into comics. She loved the works of Raina Telgemeier. She loved like the Babysitters Club series. She loved CC Bell, El Defo. Like she loved comics. And so there was this disconnect where I make comics and I love comics, and I hadn't made a comic that I could share with my daughter. And so that was the impetus for me to get into this world, because I yeah, I read comics with her all the time, and I had a feel for the genre and a feel for that kind of, it has a different kind of pace and a different kind of language and a different kind of style than the superhero comics, obviously. But I felt like I could do the job of it. And so yeah, I came up with some ideas, and I literally pitched, I think it was 4 ideas to my daughter, what for concepts, and she hated all of them except for the least formed one of mine, which was, well, what if there was a group of girls who all wanted to have a pet like you do, but for various reasons they couldn't have pets, so they started their own dog walking club. And the way her eyes lit up and the way she was like immediately wanted to know more about it, I knew that I was onto something. And then it was just a matter of finding a partner to develop the series with, because I write and I also color and I do the lettering, but I don't do any of the hard work of actually drawing the comic. So I had to find someone more skilled and talented than myself. And so luckily, that's where Michele came in.
Yeah,
Well, that
new
was a
kid in
beautiful
town.
segue.
Nice. I knew you'd set it up well for me, Nathan. Okay, so I was also a comic book colorist. So I started my career off actually in a bit of animation and video games, doing a lot of background art, character design, and just mostly traveling around, rock climbing outside, playing outside with my husband. And then we decided to move to Vancouver just for a change of scenery. Like we figured we wanted some community again in the art world. And so I reached out to Nathan because I knew that he was also a colorist in town, and I asked him out for a coffee just to like connect and see what Vancouver was like in terms of the comic world. And we got to talking about drawing and like personal projects. And I don't know if you had seen any of the travel illustrations at that point, Nathan, but I think you had pitched me almost immediately this idea you had for a dog walking series for kids.
Yeah.
And he said it would be fun. It's no pressure because, you have a kid audience. What like a perfect start to start drawing. And, I know you like drawing, but you don't do it, as a full-time job yet, but this could be your start. And so that was where PAWS began.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fun. So Michele, like she said, she reached out to me right around the time that I was, kind of hopelessly looking around on the internet and pinging acquaintances and connections in the industry and not really getting any luck. And then suddenly there was a message in my inbox from Michele saying, "Hi, I'm in town." And I knew her work. I was familiar with her work. She's an amazing colorist. But I didn't know that she drew. And so I did the thing that you do when someone says, "Hey, you want to meet up for coffee?" I went on her Instagram and I was like, "Who is this person?" Uh, and I saw that she loved rock climbing. She traveled, but I also saw that she did these amazing little cartoon travel logs of her and her husband's kind of journeys. And I think you were doing those a lot because, like, when you're rock climbing, you're not taking pictures, right? When you're up on the
Yeah.
wall, I think there's so
There are always these funny incidents that I couldn't catalog unless I drew them. So that was
yeah,
I was keeping my memories.
and the style was so cute and so gestural and so fun, and I was like, wow, this could translate really well to a kid audience. But I was like, all right, Nathan, like she just wants to talk she just wants to have a cup of coffee. Like, don't walk in there and go, "Hey, what are you doing for the next 7 years of your life?" Like, play it cool, man. And I think it was about 20 minutes into the coffee where I dropped the idea of perhaps she would be interested in looking into kids comics with me, and it just kind of evolved.
The rest is history, right? This is why we're here. That one coffee call. And thank goodness, because
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, this series, as a Babysitters Club fan, and I mean the old school, right? The old school narrative fiction ones were just my absolute favorite as a child. I just so gravitated towards, again, a group of kids together around a particular purpose and idea, and I knew I was going to love it for that reason. But I have 5 dogs. And so I knew I was going to love it for the other part of the reason. So you couldn't have found a more perfect reader for your series and thinking about this podcast today. It was so much fun.
Oh, great.
So PAWS,
Yeah.
those listeners that don't know the series yet, PAWS stands for Pretty Awesome Walkers, right? Pretty Awesome Dog Walkers, which is the fun behind that PAWS acronym. And even though we are talking about the fourth book specifically today, Hazel Has Her Hands Full, I would love for you to just talk in general a little bit about the series, and name drop, of course, a couple of those first titles if they are new for readers so that they can get a full view of it. Could you give us a little insight into the series and what readers might expect if this is their first interaction with it?
Sure. Michelle, do you mind if I take
Yeah,
this one?
go ahead. Of course.
Okay. So yeah, so the as I said, like the idea behind Pause is that there are these three girls, and they are as different as kids can be. They have different ethnic backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, different families. One's a first generation immigrant, the second generation. There's, they kind of have nothing in common. Their interests are not aligned in any way. One's really sporty. One is very, let's call her bookish and indoorsy. We have a very independent girl who, has a single mom, and so she has to be a lot more independent. And then there's kids a little more sheltered. So they're very unlikely friends, and yet they have this one thing that connects them, which is that they're all obsessed with animals, but none of them can have a pet. For various reasons. One, her mother is allergic to animals. Another, they live together in a rental building that doesn't allow pets, which was actually my situation when I was writing the book, and I was like writing it for my daughter, and it killed me that I couldn't give her a pet because of where we lived. And then another one, her father is just this super neat freak who doesn't want cat hair and pet hair in his house, and he doesn't want to be walking around picking up. And he's also kind of afraid of dogs, and uh, so so they have this problem. All these three kids do. And by the way, that father is also loosely based on me as well. Pretty tightly. And it's a mark of how much I love my daughter that when we finally moved into a place where pets were allowed recently, I did get her a cat finally.
Oh,
And you can guess who ends up scooping that litter box most of the time.
yeah.
But so they have this shared problem, and they kind of develop this plan to get their hands on some animals. And the plan is kind of horrible and doesn't really work, but they fall kind of backwards and luck into realizing that their neighborhood does need some dog walkers. So they start up a dog walking club. And so the first book, called Gabby Gets It Together, is about the origin story, as it were, of the team. And in the second book, Mindy Makes Some Space, is more focused on Mindy and her mom's relationship with the new guy. And there's also a new character that we introduced called Hazel. And then the third book is more about Priya, and she, like me, she ends up getting evicted from her home and having to move across city and away from her friends, and just struggling to deal with change. And also at the same time, Gabby gets a phone and becomes obsessed with social media, which is also a story from my own daughter's childhood. And then in this fourth book, we have Hazel. So all four of the books kind of focus on one of the members of PAWS.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's the series to date.
Yeah.
How did I do, Michelle?
10 out of 10.
I agree. That was a beautiful introduction to the series. And today we're mainly talking about Hazel Has Her Hands Full. It's getting starred reviews. It's getting wonderful accolades everywhere. It was definitely a book, as I mentioned. I loved the series overall, but I loved this book for so many reasons. I think the representation that you have in here helps readers feel seen for some, but for others, just as, if not more important, especially in today's world, to give readers a glimpse into a different way of being or living that may not be their own and developing that understanding, you managed to create this engaging graphic novel that I could just literally jump into and feel like I was there while giving me an education about what others' lives may be like and learning things about myself, learning things about the other readers that just made me think differently about my own views, especially being a mom. We'll talk about that, but Mama Bear in this book may look a little bit like this Mama Bear, and it made me question so many things in my mind, and that's just such a beautiful gift, I think, of a graphic novel. It's this story, right, that you can get lost into. And on the surface, it's fun. It's a dog walking business. We're bringing some cats in, though, by the way, in this one. And you have those deeper threads and themes of friendship and family and confidence and everything wrapped into one. So I hope listeners can hear. I hope the two of you can hear. It's such an important book, and it was such a wonderful book to read. So thank you both. I'm just going to start there. Thank you both for Michele, for asking about the cup of coffee, and Nathan, you being brave enough to ask 20 minutes in to start this.
That was so meaningful. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
You're welcome.
thank you. Yeah, you make these books and you spend a year on each of these books and you're thinking so much about them and you're trying so hard to do so many things. But as you say, also your primary goal is to entertain the kids because none of it will work or mean or land at all if they're not having fun. And it's kind of like sneaking vegetables into their food, right? Like a lot of messages and lessons, I'm constantly, trying, because I mean, thank you. There's a lot going on in the book, but yeah, I think it's fun.
Yeah.
I don't know. And
it
what else to say. That was really nice.
It doesn't feel like there's a lot going on. You're just getting it in the context of the story. And I think that especially is the beauty of a graphic novel. You just feel like you're there. The reader doesn't have to visualize everything completely in their head. There is this beautiful scene in front of them. I'd love for you to start by just giving readers a bit of an overview of Hazel and her story and what happens, without spoilers, of course. We want to save those big events at the end, but give them a little teaser of what Hazel Has Her Hands Full is about and what happens.
So this book about Hazel, I guess I should go back a bit. So when we introduce Hazel in book 2, for me and Michele, like diversity and representation is so critically important to us. We live in a very diverse part of a very diverse city. My kids are surrounded by diversity, and it doesn't make sense to us not to try to include and represent as many people and as many kinds of living and as many kinds of families as we can. And so we wanted to include someone with a visible disability. So it's not much more visible than a wheelchair. And so we wanted Hazel to be a wheelchair user, but we also wanted her to, any kid who used the wheelchair, we wanted them to kind of be able to project themselves into her and to identify with her. And so we purposefully avoided saying why she uses a wheelchair for the books 2 and book 3. She just happens to use a wheelchair and it doesn't define her. People are not defined by their disabilities, so it didn't really matter. It didn't come up. But for book 4, to not address it would have been, suddenly look like we were avoiding it, right? And so that is when we first, we talked about, we decided on, why Hazel uses a wheelchair. And there's a lot of, reasons people can use a wheelchair. But again, just as a writer, I wanted to try to show a kind of wheelchair user that you don't see a lot of. They don't get represented very much in fiction or in media, and that is ambulatory wheelchair users, people who mainly use the wheelchair, but can, walk a little bit. And I was, the reason that was in my head, because I knew a guy in university who was like that. And I remember the first time he stood up out of his chair to get something, way the reaction among people just didn't know. They were like, what is going on? Have you been faking it this entire time? Why are you using a wheelchair? And we were young and stupid, but like I felt like if I had seen that more and been exposed to that more, maybe I would have reacted better, or like
Right.
I didn't, so I just wanted to represent something that we don't see very much. And so I started watching a lot of documentaries and finding, doing a lot of research. And I found out about SMA, spinal muscular atrophy. And I was really moved by this one New Zealand documentary about a girl around Hazel's age who uses a wheelchair, and just her story and her parents' story of like seeing her, go from quote unquote normal toddler to slowly losing her mobility and needing to rely more and more on a wheelchair. And it was just such a moving story, and a story that I'd never heard before. And then if I hadn't gone like specifically looking for it, I don't know that I ever would have seen it. And so I just thought, well, why not use this book that we have as a way to kind of increase visibility of this particular disease, but also this group of wheelchair users. And so, yeah, I did as much research as I possibly could. I read everything I could. I watched as many documentaries as I could. But you don't know what you don't know. And which is why it was important to us to reach out to both an authenticity reader and a sensitivity reader. So our authenticity reader is a therapist here in Vancouver who coordinates treatment of SMA kids across the province. Her name is Neve Cushion, and she was invaluable in talking about the disease and talking about the treatment of the disease and the way that it affects kids and the way that it progresses. And she was wonderful. And then for our sensitivity reader, we wanted to talk to someone who had that lived experience with that disease and dealing with it. So Neve put us in touch with one of her patients and her family. And we talked to, actually, I never spoke to Zoe directly. Zoe is the child in the family. I talked to her mom, Vivian, and just a lovely family, and so kind and so helpful. And they just they helped us so much with crafting our treatment. And they read multiple drafts and gave us amazing input and amazing feedback. So yeah, I don't think, it's this weird thing where you want to represent as many different kinds of people and have as much diversity and inclusion as you can, but you're only one person and you only see the world through your own lens. And you don't want to appropriate voices, but so there's this struggle as an artist and a writer to show other ways of living, but you only have your one way of living. So we both thought it was so important to get some eyes on this from people who knew what they were talking about.
Yeah.
So that's the background. That's one of the reasons we wanted to write Hazel's story. The plot itself is Hazel has been dealing with this disease, or her whole life, and her mom, as as parents do. Like my children are able-bodied, and they don't. But I'm incredibly protective of them, and to the point where I think I am too protective of them. I am a helicopter parent. I fully admit it. And so I can just imagine myself, if one of my children needed extra help, how overbearing I would become. And so she's struggling not just with her own, issues, but she's struggling with managing her mother and her mother's expectations. And so she wants more independence, and she wants to prove to herself as well as her mom that she can handle more than she has so far. So she gets this opportunity to do some cat sitting, and she takes advantage of it, even though initially she's not super forthright to her mom about the fact that she is doing it. So she's a bit sneaky about it, and in the end, it all comes out in the wash. But yeah, that's the story of Hazel Has Her Hands. Well, and there's other little subplots, but that's the core of the story.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned those subplots, actually, because I felt like they were so important as well. There are so many different entry points for different readers. Here in this book, you had that maybe subplot of new blended families. You have a subplot of getting along with existing family, and not really knowing what you don't know about the people you think you know. There were so many different points of entry for a reader that I think someone will find a place for them here. But I'm so glad you talked about the research that you did and how you really brought it to life. Because for me as a reader, that was the part that was so salient for me, is that I was getting an education as well as a story. That one scene that you talked about, but actually happens in the book, is this wonderful nosy neighbor. And I'm being sarcastic, of course, when I say wonderful, listeners, but there is a neighbor who does have some thoughts, some stereotypical thoughts. And when she sees Hazel get out of her wheelchair, is just up in arms. She's faking. She doesn't need it. And, at one point, Hazel says, I don't need to use it. I get to use it. It makes life easier. It makes me have energy left over for the places that I get at when I arrive. And for someone who has never had to deal with that particular challenge, you don't think of all of the things that Hazel might have rolling around in her mind. And so I just felt it was so well done and showed me as a reader, what would I have said? What would I have thought? And that's the beauty of books, right? Is they help us experience things that we might never experience in real life. And even continuing, just knowing, right? Ask someone if they need help. Don't assume that they need help. And then, of course,
Mhm.
things with overprotective, mom in there is certainly a thread. I just felt like it was an education and something that I didn't have experience with that made me leave the book feeling like I'd be a better human in my actual life if I were to encounter that. Well done to the two of you.
Thank you. Well,
Yeah.
that line you mentioned about get to use it, I mean, I have to give full credit to Vivian. Like I don't remember the exact phrase that I had there. I was trying to get at that point, but that line I think comes directly from Zoe's mom, that, it's not about need or have to, it's about get to. I get to do this because I have the wheelchair. I get to have this device, which it transforms their lives. It makes things
Yeah.
possible. And so again, you can't discover these things unless you live them yourself, and you've got to lean on people with that knowledge. And she taught, there's so many other things, like I learned so much writing this book, and I was just trying to, pass that education on to the kids who are reading this. How do you treat people in a wheelchair?
Mhm.
And one of the things that drives her kid crazy and her kid crazy is just when people grab her wheelchair
Yeah.
and move her, and you can just imagine. And when you think about it, well, yeah, of course, like I would hate to be moved by somebody else without
Right.
my consent, without, my invitation to do so. And it's like, but people assume, and maybe and usually almost always from the best intentions, but intentions are not the only thing that matters, right? There's the effect that you have. And so, yeah, if kids read this book and the next time they see someone in a wheelchair, instead of just grabbing it, they come up and ask them, would you like a push? Then I'll feel like we've really accomplished something. Or if they just look at, kids using wheelchairs differently. And yeah, so thank you. I'm loving this podcast. I'm feeling really like kind of gratified. You make these things, you work alone, you don't know, right? You don't know how they land. That's why I do like to do school visits, and especially like Comic Cons, because you can meet the kids who read the books,
Yeah.
and hear what they think. But they just say it's good, it's bad. They don't they don't articulate what they liked about it. So yeah, I really appreciate the kind words.
Absolutely.
Michelle, what do you think? I feel like I'm doing
Oh,
all the
yeah.
talking here.
No, 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 it's great. I mean, you clearly spent a lot more time working these themes out and the importance of every little dialogue and how it matters the weight. Yeah, I feel kind of different. I guess I have a different hat on as the illustrator, responsible for the art, just to make sure that things visually are accurately representing what Nathan is trying to, to show. And I think that because I'm only doing the visual representation part, like sometimes even Nathan will have to point out, actually, can we put more weight on this leg or on her arms because she can't put her weight completely in her legs. Like that was something that I hadn't thought about before. So it was a learning experience for me as well, because I don't have much experience dealing with people with visible or invisible illnesses like that.
Mhm. So what is the process like between the two of you? Did the story come first and then the illustrations? Is it a fusion, a collaboration that goes back and forth? I'd love to know how the two of you put it all together.
So I could take this one for now. So generally, Nathan will work out where he wants the story to go for each book, and then he will sort of give me an idea of where it is, ask for some input, and then he just goes ahead and roughs out a script so that we can think about, how we want to approach this book. Um, and generally, it's he gives me an almost finished script by the time he's that I'm ready to draw, and I'll do a first pass of rough drawings called layouts, and I'll run it by him to see if there are any issues with flow or if this is the right way to represent his idea. Is this a good way of acting out the scene and the dialogue? We go back and forth for that a little bit before I get to final arts. And then that's when I send him the cleaned up inked drawings, like the black and white drawings, where he puts beautiful colors on it and the speech bubbles. Yeah. And then we go back and forth with copy editing afterwards.
I can just imagine the fun ping pong ball effect, the story, the
Mhm.
sketches, the back and forth, the black and white, the color. Ah, I love it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Comics is such a amazing collaborative medium. That's what I love about
Mhm.
comics is, there are people who wear every hat. There are people who do the writing and the drawing and the coloring and the lettering and those people, I mean, that's an incredible set of skills to have. But I do wonder if they miss out on the power of collaboration, on the power of having someone with you every step of the way, looking at what you're doing and going, well, maybe we do it another way, or that's really
Mhm.
good, but what if we tweak
Mhm.
this slightly? Would it be better? Maybe not. Maybe, and just having, I liken it to being in a band. I used to play in bands in my misspent youth, and it was great because you had all that mattered was the song at the end, right? So, I might have wanted to do a solo there, but like the rest of the band was like, no, it doesn't need that. That's too much. And it's better in the end because you have everyone, talking about it. And I think it's the same with comics is when you work together, I think the sum is greater than the parts. So maybe I'm just saying that because I don't know how to draw. I can't
No,
draw
no,
well enough to do it. I'm fooling myself into. But I think
no,
there's
I
power
totally
in.
agree. Yeah. And I think it's always surprising to see how we can either land on the same scene perfectly aligned, or we both have our different approaches for it. So oftentimes I'll lay something out and Nathan would be like, "Oh, interesting. Like that's not what I had in mind, but it's working. That's great." Or, not quite hitting the mark because there's just something in it that's not really delivering the message of the scene, even though it could work.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and it all comes down to communication, right? Like
Hmm.
most of the time, you nail a scene, and I'm like, oh wow, that's exactly or better than what I imagined. And then when it's not quite what I had in mind, I go back and I read the script that I wrote you, and I'm like, oh well, I just didn't explain it exactly the way that I could have, and well, I can't expect you to read my mind, and so yeah, like communication. I mean, with collaboration, communication is the most important thing, and I think that Michelle and I have a good shorthand. We understand each other. We know each other's strengths. We know each other's tendencies. I think by now, after almost 900 pages of
Yeah.
doing this,
Yeah.
yeah, it's just easy and it's fun now. Yeah.
I love how you just put it in terms of pages. I was thinking 4 books, and then it's over 900 pages. That
Has
does
it been over 900? I don't think about it that way too, but that's incredible.
Whatever 176 times 5 is. Oh, spoiler alert. Well, I don't know if it's a spoiler, but
Oh,
we're
no.
just finishing up the
Yes,
5th book now.
yes. You are very good at the segues that I have in mind, Nathan. That is exactly where I was hoping. I was going to ask. We have 4 books. Do we get to expect a 5th? So perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. We are just on the home stretch of book 5 here, I think. Michelle, how many pages do you have left to draw?
I have about three pages left to draw, which is so
Yeah,
exciting.
Wow. So
yeah.
Yeah.
And
really,
I'm about Yeah, I'm about 6 pages behind you in the colors and the letters, but yeah, we just got the copy edits back for the first round of copy edits, and we're gonna have this baby put to bed by the end of the month, hopefully, or shortly thereafter. Yeah.
that's exciting. And then I know we have a little bit longer ways to wait, but it's good to know that book 5 is coming. Ah,
Yeah, that's one thing that took a lot of adjustment for me coming from the world of comics, superhero comics, because those are all produced at such a tight deadline,
mhm.
and they're so pulp that they get printed up as fast as possible and shipped as fast as possible. I worked on many comics where I would turn in the final files and it would be on the shelves 2, maybe 3 weeks later, like
Wow.
just an instant gratification of seeing the thing come out in print. And we finished this Hazel book a calendar year before it came out.
Yeah.
We finished
Right.
it in January of 2024, and it just came out. So it's this problem where people are like, well, how when's the new book coming out? And I'm like, oh well, we're just finishing it up. Like I've already forgotten about book 4 because it's
Yeah.
so long ago for me. And for me, the next book is book
Yeah.
5, but then
Yeah.
oh yeah, we had another book out this last week.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so there is that delay, but I understand it's a different industry and they need to build in some time, some lead time, and yeah. But I wish I could get them into kids' hands right away because every time I talk to a kid, they get mad at me when I when I tell them the book is done and then I tell them how long they'll have to wait for it.
Yes.
They don't understand,
Yes.
and I get it, kiddo.
As an educator, as a teacher, even as a mom, I constantly had this phrase when I was trying to, convince a reluctant reader that reading really was this wonderful thing that could open up doors for them. I always would say, books are patient. Books are patient. They wait there for us. Readers, on the other hand, are not so patient when they want the series and the books to continue. But just knowing a fifth
Well,
one is
that's
out
a
there.
great way to think of
Yeah,
it. Thank you. I'm going to use that a lot
please
going
do.
forward.
Oh, well, I so appreciate you both coming onto the podcast today to talk about this wonderful, fun, and powerful book. And I would love to give you both a chance to share with listeners where they can find you online so that they can follow your work, they can know when this 5th book is coming out. Are there websites, social media sites, any place you'd like to recommend readers to today?
Sure. I could be found on Instagram mostly. That's where I'm most active, sort of. But it's at msassyk, and that's also the website's name as well.
Okay. And how about you, Nathan?
Okay. Yeah, I think like a lot of people have taken a big step back from social media in the last little while, but I still have an Instagram account that I try to post to from time to time. It's just my name, Nathan Fairbairn. It's an uncommon enough name that I own all of the entire internet. You search Nathan Fairbairn, I've got it all. It must be very annoying to the other 4 Nathan Fairbairns in the world. The only one I don't have is a LinkedIn account. So whoever, so if you find a LinkedIn Nathan Fairbairn, that's not me. Every other Nathan Fairbairn is me. My website is nathanfairbairn.com. Yeah.
Okay.
Blue Sky, I think, is Nathan Fairbairn, but I forget to log into that for months on end. So
It's hard to
yeah,
keep up.
my website, yeah, it is. Yeah. And I have a website. I don't know who goes to it, but I have a contact form there, which I do check as often as I can. Although recently it has been discovered by the bots, and so now I get a lot of ads through that contact form. So I might miss it. I'm sorry if I have, if you've tried to reach it, but I do try to check that.
Yeah. Well, I will.
I'd like to, sorry, Stephanie, I'd just like to add one more thing because we get a lot of emails regarding school visits. And I would just like any listener to know that I will be working on something to share on either YouTube or some social medias to talk more about PAWS if anybody wants more insight to the series and look at some behind the scenes. So please follow on my social media for any extra information and updates.
Wonderful. I will be sure to put links to your websites and your social media handles in the show notes. And of course, links to all 4 of the books in the PAWS series so that listeners can get their hands on them. Thank you both again for a wonderful episode. This was a wonderful book, a wonderful conversation, and it was so nice to meet both of you on the call today.
Thank you so much, Stephanie.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. It was lovely. Thank you. You made my day.
Good. I'm glad. And listeners, thank you for listening to another episode of KidLit Love, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the KidLit Love podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes at alitlife.com. And if you want more, you might like to listen to my other podcast called Get Literate. It's a podcast that explores all things books and reading, notebooks and writing, and everything in between to build a life you love. One more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a bookish friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish community of KidLit Love. Thanks for listening.